Okay, welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second session of the Symposium, Maintaining Healthy Brains. I hope you guys had an opportunity to network and chit-chat with some of your peers and colleagues, and now it's time to hand over the stage to Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. Dr. Bonnie Kaplan is a professor emerita at the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. She has published widely on the biological basis of development disorders and mental health, particularly the contribution of nutrition to mental health. Her efforts to include nutrition knowledge in the care of people with mental health challenges has earned her a variety of awards, including Dr. Rogers Prize in September 2019, the selection in 2017 as one of the 150 Canadian difference makers in mental health in honor of Canada's 150th birthday. In 2021, Bonnie was chosen as one of the top 7 over 70 in Calgary. This award was partly for her book, The Better Brain, written with Professor Julia Ruckledge and published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, as well as her 2 charitable funds supporting research by junior colleagues who study nutrition and mental health. Her primary goal is to influence the way mental health treatment is delivered. So with that, I want to welcome Bonnie to the stage. So lovely to meet you and looking forward to your talk.
Thanks so much, Pritma, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. If I could have my first slide, Adam. So we're supposed to be talking about maintaining healthy brains, and what I'm proposing to you is that nutrition is the foundation. So on the next slide, I show a typical disclosure slide on the left, which is just that no commercial interest in any company or sale of any product. That's been true for me for my whole career. But recently someone said I should show my book because maybe that's a conflict of interest. However, I don't really see it that way, since my goal in life is not to sell books. My goal is to change the way mental health treatment is provided. And I hope I'll convince you in this short time that that's an important thing. So the overview of my talk is bad news, good news, and then some practical suggestions. So let's start with the bad news. And there is, there is one slide on terminology. Next slide. Yeah, I just need to say this one little bit. I want to be able to use the term macronutrients and micronutrients with you. Macronutrients are the things that, frankly, we're all getting a lot of: fats, carbs, protein. Micronutrients are the things that we should be getting more of, as I'll be showing you, and I will use it mostly to refer to minerals and vitamins. Not everybody uses it exactly the same. Then on my next slide, we start with the bad news, and this comes from the mental health world. Now, some of you were not alive in 1960, but I was, and I can tell you that what this is showing is pretty accurate, that we all figured that the prevalence of mental disorders was less than 1%. This shows 0.03%. And in fact, the people who wrote The Invisible Plague, E. Fuller Torrey and Judy Miller, entitled their book The Invisible Plague because they were shocked that the prevalence rate had tripled in 1960 relative to historical documents. They were really concerned that 0.03 was a plague. Well, you know the current story. According to the World Health Organization, it's now 20%. And that's only the point prevalence. If you look at lifetime prevalence, the World Health Organization tells us it's 50%. And as many of my friends say when I mention this, they say, that's crazy. And yes, it is truly nuts. It means that our current systems are not sufficient. The next slide and the one after it, I want to just show you why we need to change, and then I'll come back to these. One reason is this is the way our populations are eating. And so you recognize this as pretty highly processed food with very few micronutrients in there. The next slide shows you what all the books out there are telling you is how we should eat. This is a Mediterranean style whole foods diet with lots of fruits and vegetables, fish, meat, assuming you're not a vegetarian, milk and dairy, assuming you're not a vegan, but then whole grains for your carbs, olive oil for your oil whenever possible, snacking on nuts and seeds. And if you eat steak and lobster, it will be more expensive. But if you don't, if you get a lot of your protein and the primary meals from the center of that slide, the beans and legumes, you will save money. And that's been shown in studies. The next slide then continues with bad news. And I have to say that when I saw this just about 2 or 3 months ago, I thought, oh my God, we're doomed, because this is from the US government. I have Canadian data, but it's a little older. This is very, very current. And it's from a very well-established cross-sectional, cross-national system of data collection called NHANES. And that's the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It's been going on for 50 years, since 1971. And the first article published in JAMA showed that 2/3 of what our children are putting into our mouths basically has no vitamins and minerals. I mean, this is ultra processed chemicals. It's the center of the grocery store. It's not the, what Michael Pollan does, eating from the outside aisles. 2/3. And then right after that, from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the same NHANES data was evaluated for people over the age of 19, and adults don't have anything to be bragging about, because over half of adult food intake was also ultra processed. So let's go to the next slide and ask the question, since we know that nutrition is the foundation of our physical and mental resilience, that's abundantly well proven, and it's been known for millennia. So the question is, what happens to people whose nutrient intake, and maybe that should say micronutrient intake, is half of what it could or should be? And the next slide shows you we already know, because back in 1950, a study was published that showed exactly what happened. Now, this was part of the University of Minnesota starvation experiments, where they were looking at the impact of starvation following World War II, and people were released from the camps, and people were trying to figure out how to refeed people, etc. So they took 36 normal, healthy men, and they put them on 50% of normal caloric and nutrient intake for 6 months. Now, you should immediately be noticing that that is not what our population is doing. Our society is not cutting their caloric intake in half. That's perfectly obvious, right? But they certainly are cutting their micronutrient content in half, according to the very recent NHANES data. So what happens? Well, if you look at the list on this slide, you'll see, using 1950s language, all the symptoms of depression, anxiety, and even some of the ones from ADHD, inability to focus and concentrate. So that is it for the bad news, but I hope I've convinced you that there is a problem right now, and it's getting worse in spite of people spending decades telling us all to eat better, to eat real food. It's not happening. So let's go to good news, the next slide. The best news of all when it comes to mental health is that we're talking about a modifiable variable. So often when I'm speaking to mental health clinicians, I know that they're dealing with a lot of variables that they cannot modify. History of child abuse or neglect, trauma, etc. They cannot change that. They can only improve resilience and improve coping, which I'll show you is very much a function of nutrition. So, I mean, the first step would be great end war and poverty, but as a species, you can see we're doing a terrible job for both of those, even right now. But seriously, I think we should be focusing on education, and it should begin in elementary school. So what I'm going to show you next is what I think the education should demonstrate to children, and right into medical school, by the way, because physicians are often not taught this particular aspect of nutrition and mental health either. So I'm going to show you these slides. They are not complete. There are a lot more things that I think should be taught, but this is key. And in fact, it was a major reason that Julie and I wrote our book, The Better Brain. So the next slide shows a little bit about our brain and its use of nutrients. I was taught as a child that when I eat, I was trying to build strong bones and muscles. Nobody ever told me that I was mostly eating for my brain. And apparently that's still the case in our educational system. But our brain is our greediest organ. It accounts for only about 2% of our body weight, but it is the most demanding, punching above its weight organ that we have, because it consumes 20 to 50% of the nutrients at any given time. So that's why I say when we're eating to feed our brain. The next slide gives you another figure that a lot of people find interesting. In the upper right-hand corner, you see the incredibly complex vasculature of a human brain. And each of us has 4 to 6 liters of blood inside us. But at any given point in time, an entire liter, which is like almost a quarter of our blood supply, is in this little 2% of our body called the brain. And of course, this is a little reminder to me to tell you that it's not just bringing nutrients to the brain. I'm talking about nutrition, but it's carrying oxygen and some immunologic factors. It's removing waste products, etc. So vasculature is important for demonstrating this, but I'm only focusing on the micronutrients. The next slide is the one that introduces the concept that I've been teaching to children down to grade 6, and they are able to understand this. But I know that a lot of people don't get this in school, that metabolism relies upon cofactors. So let's say your brain needs serotonin. Well, what do you eat? You can't eat serotonin. There's no food that's going to give you serotonin or dopamine or any other neurotransmitter. What you eat are the micronutrients, which enable your clever little brain to synthesize those neurotransmitters. So if chemical A has to be metabolized to become chemical B, it's an enzymatic reaction, but the enzymes rely upon an abundant supply of cofactors, which are minerals and vitamins. The next slide shows you an example. Now you have to understand that this is a tiny, tiny bit of one metabolic pathway, and it's very oversimplified. What it shows is tryptophan, serotonin, and melatonin are in red only because when I speak to lay audiences, those are words that they recognize, and they don't know words like 5-hydroxyl-tryptophan, etc. So you can go online and take a look at every arrow. Every arrow is an enzymatic reaction. And you can click on that arrow and ask, well, are there any micronutrients required? It's cofactors. And the answer seems to be always yes. So if you look there, you'll see a total of, I've forgotten the number, 12 to 15 vitamins and minerals. Some you've heard of, lots of B vitamins, some you might not have heard of, like molybdenum, a trace mineral. But the point is, it illustrates the importance of all of these micronutrients. And another thing I want you to take away from this slide is if somebody ever says to you, oh, I take vitamin, I don't know, X, so that my brain is healthy, think of this slide and you'll understand why that's an absurd proposition. The idea that a single nutrient is going to optimize the complexity of our brain biochemistry is absurd. The other thing I want you to take away from this, though, is, and this is what people tell me they take away from it. They sometimes say, Bonnie, I'm not going to remember anything else you said, but when I go to put a piece of food in my mouth, I'm going to ask myself, am I feeding those pathways? Because they will remember and understand for the first time that what they are consuming directly influences their brain function. The next slide is my reminder that I do have to cover some of the evidence very quickly. Nutrition is the foundation of our mental health. That is an airtight case, and it rests on correlational studies, which I'm not going to even bother with because they don't prove causation. But prospective longitudinal studies have been done all over the world. So for example, the one in Canada I put in parentheses, and I can give anybody the references if they want them, was done with children in grade 5, and they evaluated how everybody ate, and everybody who was evaluated had no mental or behavioral or emotional problems that had resulted in any kind of treatment or the need for any treatment. They came back 2 years later and asked the question, did the dietary intake 2 years previously predict who would be referred to a pediatrician or a general physician for diagnosis and treatment of a mental or emotional problem? And the answer was yes. And not only that, they showed that health behaviors predicted a huge difference in cost. I mean, we're not talking about money today, but what we are talking about is the potential to save huge amounts, over 50% of budget spent on mental health care. Anyway, those are the prospective longitudinal studies. I'm going to only show you the treatment study. So could I have the next slide? The first one, okay, so I'm just going to mention this in words. There are 3 independent studies where they took people with depression and they taught them how to eat a whole foods diet. And in all 3 studies, they showed significant decrease in depression of a greater magnitude than has ever been shown from an antidepressant, always within 12 weeks and always with no adverse effects, of course, because eating better just makes everything better. It doesn't cause adverse effects the way psychiatric meds do. So is the solution just to improve our diets? Is that it? Is that all it takes? I don't want you to think that that is true for everyone. So my next slide talks about the kinds of problems that interfere with a diet adequately controlling mental health problems. And one is individual differences. And it really relates to not how much nutrition is circulating in your peripheral blood, which is all that we can test right now, but it is a fact, we know this from at least 50 inborn errors of metabolism in physical health. It's a fact that we inherit a predisposition for needing varying amounts of cofactors. So maybe your brain works better on less magnesium, but maybe I need more magnesium and somebody else needs more vitamin B6 and I need more iron, etc. So you get the idea. And as it says in point 2 here, currently we have no way to test for that. I'm not talking about what's circulating in our body. I'm talking about what our brain needs for optimal function. The third point, we have a half a chapter in our book on the soil microbiome, but I'm going to just skip over that. I'm sure some of you have a rural background and are interested in that. What I'm going to do is show you 3 summary slides now to summarize all the research on nutrition and mental health. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is an overall view of placebo-controlled randomized trials. I'll bet most of you didn't think there'd ever been even one, but in fact, there are many. And the vast majority of them have shown positive effects of micronutrients in pill form. But what I highlighted here in yellow is the common theme. It doesn't matter what kind of disorder you select. What improves in every study is, when it improves, there's no magic here, so it doesn't help everybody. But emotion regulation, people become less irritable, children have fewer temper tantrums, etc. This is only true with multi-nutrient formulas, not single nutrients. And you know why now, because you saw that metabolic pathway. And the ones that are most effective are the broad spectrum ones. Could I have the next slide, please? This is a summary of some studies that were done using broad spectrum formulas developed here in Alberta. They have roughly 15 vitamins and 15 minerals, and they were developed and are being studied by independent scientists. And this shows resilience, folks, and that's the topic of this section, really, isn't it? So the different colored lines, the earthquake is blue. It shows the DAS, the Depression, Anxiety, and Stress Scale. People after the earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand, that's where my co-author Julia Ruckledge is at University of Canterbury, within 4 to 6 weeks came below the black line. That's the normal cutoff. So they came into the normal range for depression, anxiety, and stress. Same thing after the Southern Alberta flood. They came within 4 to 6 weeks. They came down into the normal range. And the third one was not a placebo, not a randomized trial. It was back in New Zealand after the mosque massacres, the mass shootings. They were monitored clinically, and they also went into the normal range. So who didn't go into the normal range? The comparison groups, people who had treatment as usual, which is usually psychiatric medication, or in our flood study, we had a comparator of a single nutrient. The next slide is one more summary slide of placebo-controlled randomized trials carried out in New Zealand, Canada, and the US, all showing, in people with ADHD, all showing significantly greater improvement on the clinical global index when from the people who took micronutrients compared to placebo. So the next slide is really a summary for me of where I think this field is. And that is, it's an evidence-based statement. No child should be treated first with medication when presenting with that emotional instability, ADHD or meltdowns or emotion dysregulation. We should first feed their brains and improve their lifestyles. Medication, this is not an anti-medication statement. It may have to be considered, but it should be supplementary. So my next slide shows you what you should consider. Practical suggestions are under the resource tab on my website. My website is bonniejkaplan.com for info on the most studied multi-nutrient formulas, all of which are reviewed in chapter 11 of our book. Those are the two websites, and I only put them there. I've never been affiliated with them, and they don't fund any research. I only put them there because if I don't, I get a lot of emails. Next slide, people wanting to know what they are. The first step for everyone is to begin to get rid of ultra-processed products and eat real food and not go immediately to a restrictive diet. So the last slide is just a list of resources. There are various videos on my website, including a link to Julia Rutledge's TEDx talk, as well as a free course, a MOOC on edX, and a 4-minute read on conversation.com. And my last slide is just an illustration of where things are in my field. And that is, the facts are being ignored, but they are there if you take a look at them. And that was really why I try to speak to public audiences all the time. Thank you. I would welcome some questions, Pritma.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Your work is absolutely fascinating and so timely, particularly as we tackle this shadow pandemic on mental health and have been, eating not as healthy as usual. And so one of the questions actually that the audience posed, you had already answered in that last slide in terms of some of these alternative restricted diets and their impact on mental health. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts though on, we've all experienced episodes of acute or chronic anxiety, depression, trauma, and in those moments, we often reach for the macronutrients. We reach for the fats and the sugars and all of that. And so how do we change those behaviors? We know that micronutrients are better for us, but in those times of stress, our brain is almost telling us we want comfort food. So what's your take on that?
Jane, thank you for asking that. I really appreciate it. First of all, the shadow epidemic of mental health is because people are reaching for comfort food. They are not thinking about building their brain's resilience. It's not the only thing. Gosh, I tend to make it sound like I see the entire world in terms of nutrition and families and psychosocial variables are irrelevant. I'm a research psychologist. Trust me, I understand that all those other things are important. But what we need to do is teach people to comfort their brain by building its strength. And I will answer your question, Pritma, by telling you what my audiences say to me. I just wish I had $1 for every time people have come up to me, before it was on Zoom, have said to me after a talk, and I've given like 100 in the last 15 months, I say it again and again, think of the metabolic pathways before you put a piece of food in your mouth. And they come up to me and say, that was an aha moment. No one had ever taught me that with every single bite, I'm making a choice to build my brain's resilience or not. So if it influences the way people eat, then we just need to link it together. I just want to add one thing, and I don't know if you have a long list of questions, but there are a lot of books out there that say, eat this, eat that. I call them, they're shaking their fingers in our face. They don't say why. But if we could just teach people about brain metabolism, and I didn't have time to get into the relevance for mitochondrial function, production of ATP, and balancing of excessive inflammation, as well as fixing the microbiome, it all comes down to the same thing. Building a healthier brain and body, we will be more resilient to those problems, and we'll quit calling junk food comfort food,
Yeah.
because it isn't.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think, the world does revolve around what we eat, and all of our social norms and our gatherings, we break bread together. We're already talking about those types of things. Everything that we do revolves around food. So it's so important. We have another question actually that popped up here. Let me see this. How does this reconcile with those who live in areas in food deserts, in areas where they don't have equal access to micronutrients?
Mm-hmm. So I can't solve all the problems in the world, and I get asked about food deserts a lot, and we need to do something about it. But the reality is, I know I spoke to someone once who had emigrated recently from Africa. I'm sorry, I don't remember which country, and it doesn't matter. The point is, he grew up on all kinds of dried beans, legumes, and lentils, etc. And so he found it not too hard to go and buy 5-kilo bags of some of these things and eat very cheaply and with excellent health as a result. So there maybe are ways to get around it. It raises an issue. People think that what we call junk food, I don't usually use that term, but ultra processed stuff, they think it's cheaper. They say, I can't afford to eat better. But I know clinicians right here in Calgary who have had their clients track the cost of their foods when they were eating the old way, and then the cost when they started doing it the new way, which research has shown should save 20% of the budget. And they're astounded. They do save money. And I struggle with understanding why we have this myth that eating a lot of bags of chips and soda and things like that is cheap. And I think it's because each individual item is cheap. With only $1.50, you can go to a vending machine and you're no longer hungry for a little while, right? But you can't live that way. You end up spending a lot more money for all of those individual cheap items, to say nothing of how you're cheating your health.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was covering 2 points. Yeah.
Well, and you make a good point there. I think it's not only about the money, but the time associated with it as well, right? How quickly can I get the food on the table?
Right.
It's a big factor in determining cost.
Lentils cook as quickly as a pizza.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, some of the other ones you have to buy canned, but that's okay. Canned beans are really quite okay, especially if you rinse them, you get rid of the extra sodium. So I don't buy the time thing so much.
Yeah.
Planning is another thing. And a lot of people in the mental health world don't have executive function skills when their brains are cloudy, etc., to plan. And it's harder for them.
Yeah.
That is true.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. This has been a fascinating talk, and I look forward to asking more questions of you in the panel discussion. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it over to my partner, Jordan, to introduce the next speaker.
Thanks, Prima. We are going to get right to our next speaker. We may have to troubleshoot a little bit to make sure that Suzette is able to hear us appropriately. So I want to bring Dr. Suzette Brémault-Phillips on screen. And before I introduce her, Suzette, can you hear me okay?
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just off screen, things were a little bit difficult, but it looks like this is going to roll ahead perfectly. So I would like to welcome Dr. Suzette Brémault-Phillips. She is an occupational therapist and associate professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy, Faculty of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Alberta. And she is the director of the Heroes in Mind Advocacy and Research Consortium, a provincial hub for research, teaching, and service for military, veteran, public safety personnel, and their families. An experienced clinician, educator, and researcher, she has worked in a variety of settings across provinces and healthcare systems, supporting military members, veterans, families, and civilians. Her expertise is in the area of mental health, trauma-informed care, complex needs, and rehabilitation. Suzette's research interests include resilience, well-being, moral injury, trauma-focused and novel psychotherapies, including virtual reality interventions, mobile and digital health, implementation science, and system capacity building. Without further ado, I introduce Dr. Suzette Brémault-Phillips.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with everyone. It's great to be here, and Dr. Kaplan, thank you for a brilliant presentation. It was wonderful to hear your inspiring talk and all of the foundations that you've laid, and certainly the focus on resilience and trauma-informed practice, trauma-informed care, and the way the body-brain connection and being connection in order to facilitate resilience for individuals from a young age onward. And certainly I do resonate with much of what you've shared. What I'd like to focus on today is on promoting health, mental health at home. So it's going to be more of a presentation regarding some practical applications, some practical things that one can do in order to promote mental health individually and communally, especially during these times when many of us are under very stressful circumstances as a result of the pandemic, as a result of many socioeconomic factors, isolation that many people have dealt with, the global affairs that are occurring right now, and many of the other national and international events that have been occurring. So certainly we are not without the stresses that all of us are around, all that is around us, and at the same time, a brilliant opportunity for many of us to come together and to make choices, as Dr. Kaplan had very aptly stated, to make choices in each moment about not only what we eat, but what we choose to do, how we choose to think, how we choose to engage, to be able to facilitate resilience in those moment-to-moment decisions that each one of us makes. So I'm going to be looking at some things that we can do to promote our mental health, our well-being at home and in the community. Much of what I am going to share is informed by clinical practice, as well as a number of different experiences that I've had supporting individuals up in Fort McMurray, or individuals who have gone through extreme experiences of exposure to traumatic events, as well as those who are leaders and are trying to facilitate culture change and support large-scale environments. So I'm going to be thinking about things from both an individual, a community, and a socioecological perspective. So that the resilience, as I talk about it here, isn't just about me or one individual, but really about all of us. So very much about how each of us can make choices, but that we also are in the context of communities, where communities also need to be mindful and intentional about supporting each other as we go forward, and looking at how systems can support that. So some of what I say is going to be very individually focused, and some of it I'd like to invite us to think about what the social implication is as well, in order to be able to enhance and support each other as we look forward to promoting our well-being, promoting our health, and our resilience going forward. If I can take the next slide, please. So one of the biggest things I'd like to start off with, and I haven't put a lot of words on a lot of the slides, more a cue just to talk about various things about different aspects of our world. So personally, from an individual level and from a community level, really looking at how do we take care of ourselves from a holistic perspective. Our bodies, we've heard about nutrition and our health, and how that feeds into our brain, and how resilience is so much connected with that. At the same time, there's other holistic components to consider. So everything from our sleep and our physicality. So how do we sleep? How do we eat? How do we spend our time? How do we maintain our exercise and our physical health? How do we take care in a timely way of our well-being from a physical perspective? So how do we manage our maintaining a balanced diet? And when people are in more socioeconomically deprived or compromised positions, how can people maintain that. So just, I'm not going to go into that a lot, but just thinking about with you some of the simple things about how we can take care of our physical health, how we can support each other if people are not able to manage their diet, not able to manage their exercise. Certainly we know from the research that physical health, exercise are very important, salient in terms of managing our resilience. So where our bodies are healthy, our exercise is up, it maintains our longevity, gives us an outlet to release some stress, enhances our endorphins and our connection with ourselves, and enables us to have clearer thinking, clearer minds as we go forward in our day and making decisions. So there's lots of things related to our physicality that's really important, likewise with our sleep. So making sure that we're doing some good sleep hygiene in order to be able to get the adequate amount of rest and sleep, and for our system to be able to be functioning the best way that it possibly can. In times of COVID, we know that people have had a lot more challenges with insomnia. So looking for different interventions that can support that, be that from doing regular sleep hygiene, from having very dark environments within which to sleep, making sure that we're watching the amount of blue light we're seeing on screens before we go to bed or during the night. Making sure that we're having a routine in terms of our sleep to make sure that we're following a regular schedule so that our systems are in line and in check. So all of those kinds of things to be able to support our sleep and our healthy minds, healthy thinking as we go forward. There's also a lot of different challenges or things that we can do in order to maintain our intellectual health. So being able to learn new things, be stimulated, be curious about what's going on around us, to think through and problem solve, to keep our minds active and oriented in ways that are not necessarily going to be focused as much on things that are negative, but balancing those with a positive. We're inundated with so much about things that are not so good news in the news. So really taking time to be very intentional and make choices about what we're putting into, not just our bodies from the point that Dr. Kaplan made, but what we're putting into our minds and into our hearts, our experience. So really taking time to balance, to screen, to make sure that we're dedicating our vision and our time to what we want to do. Maybe for some of us, being able to evaluate what kind of screen time we're engaging in to make sure that we're not repeating or carving into our minds things that are more challenging to watch, especially with much that's on the news as of late and has been on the news. So intellectual health, looking at how we can learn and give each other opportunities for learning. So Dr. Kaplan had talked about the importance of starting at a young age and really looking at how we can support children up through our adults and onward to be able to continue to be stimulated and to learn in terms of our intellectual well-being. We also can consider other things related to our spiritual well-being, and I'll talk about those in a little bit, in terms of being able to be present, be connected with ourselves, to be compassionate with one another, with ourselves, in terms of being patient, and also having an attitude of gratitude for the things that are around us. And I'm going to speak about that in a little bit as well. Being able to be kind to ourselves and to one another. All of us are under very stressful situations, some opportunities and some good things many good things that are happening around us. So taking time to look for the positive, look for the good things that are happening around us, and looking for how we might be able to connect with one another. In terms of how we can also emotionally maintain some good resilience, is really taking time to be reflective and be compassionate with ourselves as we reflect on our own lives, looking through a trauma-informed lens, being able to appreciate that everybody has different life experiences. All of us are going to go through various different experiences in our day, and how we can be supportive of one another. There are a number of strategies to be able to certainly look at our emotional well-being, our emotional health individually, from a family perspective, from a community perspective, to be able to work through some of the challenges that we've had, and to be able to reevaluate what some of those experiences in our lives have imprinted on each of us, and how we can make different choices and support one another in being able to reach our potential and collaborate with one another to be able to really thrive, not just survive in the environments that we're in. So some of them, one simple intervention that we actually utilized up in Fort McMurray following the wildfire, following the wildfire and during the wildfire up in Fort McMurray, was actually doing writing exercises, taking time to do some journaling and some self-awareness, some writing down things that might be bothering us, might be current events that are occurring, or might be things that have happened long past that that might need some voice and some validation. So one key exercise that individuals can do is either journaling or expressive writing. We know from Dr. Pennebaker, who's been doing a lot of research in that way, that writing even for 15 minutes over 4 days can actually enable people to deal with some of the trauma that they've dealt with. Certainly that's a complement to other forms of supports that individuals might need in more close ways or more distant ways. So, for example, some close ways being able to look at our own selves and honor the experiences that any one of us has by naming that, by writing it down. It may be that we reach out to people who are in our world and connect, people who we trust, to have that one trusted other. We know from trauma care and trauma-informed practices that having even one trusted person that we can go to in our world from a very young age and onward, that is a very much a protective factor. So looking at ways that we can find those trusted people in our lives that we can connect with. So taking time to do that, taking time to connect and share where we currently are. If those people aren't available, also reaching out either in text form or reaching out for counseling or supportive counseling. Things like Wellness Together Canada that has available to us 24-hour a day supports for anyone in Canada free of charge, or resources and services at a national level, let alone a local level. So looking at ways that we have those resources available to us. Another resource would be things like text for PTSI, for post-traumatic stress injury, text for well-being, that is available as a one-way text message that comes to everybody on just a simple text at 9 o'clock in the morning, to be able to receive some text messaging that has been shown and demonstrated to reduce depression, reduce anxiety, improve insomnia, and other things. So looking at ways that there are simple things that can actually be at our fingertips, literally over your cell phone, that might be able to improve well-being and emotional health. From a spiritual side, really looking at taking care on that front as well. Wondering if we can go to the next slide for a moment. So from a spiritual side, really looking at being present, taking time to be with ourselves, to connect with those around us. For some individuals, that's going to be connecting with their faith-based communities. For some individuals, connecting with their spiritual self is going to be looking at what is meaningful, what is purposeful, what gives them a sense of being able to make sense of what's going on in our world right now. Taking time to connect with other people who we're deeply connected with, being mindful, being thoughtful, taking time to meditate, taking time to breathe and breathe deeply, even in the moment, taking time to appreciate the gifts that we have, the food that's on our table, the opportunities that are afforded to us, and looking for the silver lining in things that might not always appear to be so. So taking time for being present, for being compassionate as well with others, and I'll talk about that in a minute. From the spiritual side, also being grateful for the things that we do have. In addition to taking the time to write down things that may be traumatic in the rhythm of one's day, maybe doing that midday, but at the end of the day, taking time as part of one's sleep hygiene or being prepared to go to sleep, to end the day with a gratitude journal, writing down one or two things that one is profoundly grateful for, however small, however large those moments of gratitude may be. Knowing that going to sleep on something that one is grateful for is much better for one's health and well-being than it is to go to sleep ruminating and chewing on those things that are going to be anxiety evoking. The other part about the spiritual side is also where our relationships are healthy and where there might be some fractures that might cause any one of us some anxiety. So looking at how we can be reparative, restorative in relationships in appropriate measure. So looking at how we can reconcile those relationships and with ourselves, with others around us, and for that which is beyond ourselves. I'm going to go to the next slide if we could. Reaching out to others, the profound importance of connection, the profound importance of attachment, knowing that attachment from a very young age is profoundly important for any one of us to be able to give us a sense of groundedness, knowing that each one of us is not alone in our world. So taking time to reach out to others, to be heard, to hear others, and to listen to deeply and spend time with others. There's the spending time, but there's the being with that really can have profound impacts on individuals. With that is taking time to learn who the other is and who oneself is, and where there's those profound moments of connection and opportunities to grow together and to spend time together. Next slide, please. So with that, reconnecting with one another in things that we do, but also just with our playful side. There can't be enough said about play, about creativity, about laughter, about engagement, about spending time with the celebration of what life is, and really drinking in those moments and taking time for memory making, for play, for being, for laughter. Not only for the connection that's there, most profoundly for that, but also for the endorphins that it gives. And in that laughter, also reaching out to others in altruism and compassion, being able in those times to celebrate and play, but also to reach out, to lend a hand and to care. We know from the literature and from the research that caring and spending time actually is very restorative and protective of people's mental health. And also from our stress levels, it reduces our stress, it enhances our resilience and our well-being. Next slide, please. So celebrating the moments that we have with one another, the achievements, and really making a choice to turn our attention to those things. It's very easy to get caught up in all of the stresses of the day and not to take the moments to, with one another, see each other's potential, celebrate each other's moments and potential, and to do that in families, to do that in communities, in classrooms, in businesses, in workplaces, and as a larger society. There's so much that gets unlooked at, uncelebrated, so that we can be bogged down by what is so negative in our world and what is so stressful, and really need to take time to celebrate and look at the positives, what is really going on. Next slide, please. In that, really being in and enjoying the moment, taking time to seize it, to embrace it, to drink it deeply, and to appreciate it. I can go to the next slide too. With that, getting out and appreciating nature. Being out in nature is such a restorative, such a healing place to be with one another, so to facilitate connection, but also to connect ourselves with that which is so much around us, of beauty, of awe, of wonder, and of that which is so much beyond ourselves. Just to realize and to move out of, to keep our eyes on the bigger picture, but really to take that time to pause, to reconnect, to unplug, and to appreciate the beauty that we actually do have around us and celebrate that. We can go to the next slide, please. Being curious, learning, not just for ourselves, but for one another, so that we can contribute to our world in a larger way. So that sense of connection, that sense of being curious and learning and being able to thrive in our world and make a difference in remarkable ways, so that we are empowered through what we know, through what we can contribute for the sake of one another and making a larger contribution. So taking whatever opportunities we have, small and large, to be curious, to learn, but in that light, to learn with appropriate information, to look for where there may be misinformation, and to make some solid choices about what kind of information we actually do take in. We can go to the next slide, please. Visioning forward based on what we learn, to dream and to look at possibilities, opportunities, potentials, to realize our dreams and to make some choices about what that might look like. So to look forward, to look hopefully at what might be possible. If we can go to the next slide as well. Working together and lending a hand. So as we vision forward, as we dream, looking at how we can collaborate, how we can find a common mission, find a common goal, find something that is meaningful for any one of us, and then bring people together to work to build our communities, to build our society in a very intentional and systematic way. And where there are things that need to be changed, to look for opportunities and ways to build forward. There are many naysayers, many individuals who will look at what isn't possible. And I think in our society today, we need possibility thinkers. We need people who can think outside the box and who are willing to get their hands dirty and to build together. If we can go to the next slide. Looking for the silver lining. There is so much that people can get in terms of our mental health bogged down by. So thinking about what are the silver linings underneath the challenges that we all face. And I'm going to name one that's maybe obvious or may not be obvious. COVID-19 caused us to go into isolation, and physical restrictions disconnected us from one another. But what we've seen in the midst of COVID-19 is the ways that even doing this forum here has enabled us to connect in very broad ways. So looking at digital health means, ways that we've become more innovative, more effective. So looking at the silver lining, even amidst the things that on first blush have caused so much challenge and so much devastation within our world. So there are things to be hopeful for. There are things to be to vision forward with in our world. So to look for those and to find them. Now, 2 more slides that I just want to close with. The next slide of looking at the ways that each one of us can make a difference in our world. How each one of us has gifts and talents and opportunities, knowledge that we can contribute, but that we have to risk showing those. We have to risk sharing them. We have to risk making mistakes and failing. We have to risk taking chances and shining brightly in a world where sometimes we don't even know where to start. So I just invite people to really look at what each one of us can contribute to our greater world and how we might be able to meaningfully contribute. And finally, on the last slide, to not lose sight of hope. That hope is our greatest gift right now, to be able to make a difference in our world and to look for the small seeds that might be in odd places and how we can plant seeds and build a future together that is resilient for each one of us individually and collectively, and how we can build a better global community. Finally, just a final word to when we are struggling with mental health challenges, to reach out when we need it and seek appropriate services and supports, and to know that that isn't something that we need to be ashamed about, but that is something that all of us struggle with, and increasingly so. So really to reach out in a timely way when we need those supports. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Dr. Brémault-Phillips, thank you so much. What a timely presentation. Considering, as you hinted at in so many ways, trying to continue to turn the corner on the pandemic and looking after all of our mental health. Tanisha asked a question about what strategy was most effective for helping the evacuees of the fire in Fort McMurray. Can I broaden that question a little bit to say, is there, of all of the strategies you suggested, journaling, getting out in nature, meditating, playing, dreaming and learning, are there certain tasks that are more well received throughout the spectrum of folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different levels of education and socioeconomic status, where people receive a certain method better than another?
I don't know if I can. It's an excellent question. I love the question. I don't know that I have an answer that can respond as much as I'd like. I think that one thing from a trauma-informed care perspective and from a respect for each other perspective is really when we're supporting each other to look at what the strengths of the other person is, and really to move from a strengths-based perspective individually and communally. So whatever the socioeconomic challenges or whatever the lifespan issues might be, to really look at what someone's strengths are, what a community's, what a family's strengths are, to build on those and to do the things that are low-hanging fruit first, where people are going to have some immediate relief, some immediate connection. I think one of the biggest things that I would say is connection, connection, connection. That there can't be anything that goes wrong with that. And I think if I turn to my Fort McMurray experience of journeying with individuals who've been affected and wandering through the streets in Fort McMurray, that one of the things that they were most affected by were when people cared, when people saw them and the struggle that they were going through and lent a helping hand. That sense of seeing each other in our strengths and also in our need, and just just being there for one another. I think that was I don't think anyone can go wrong with that. I think what we can do is sometimes if we keep our eyes focused too much on where the limitations are that people may be struggling with and don't focus on their strengths, that's where we might get into trouble. Or not trouble, that we might miss some things that we could instead have been impactful and had a transformative impact on someone's life.
Is it more difficult to reach individuals or families who are still immersed in a situation of what's contributing to the stress injury? And I say that in scope of you've worked with folks who've moved through military and are now veterans and removed from that operational stress, or service members in police and fire who may have retired. But what to nurses, doctors, other healthcare professionals where it's adaptable, but they're immersed still in COVID, they're immersed in, lengthy shifts where the rest of their day doesn't give space for these tools?
One thing, there's a timing issue about when someone is ripe and ready, and when is the time to bear down and put one's head down and move through the issues that are in front of one, and when is the time to be able to let their guard down and actually be able to address these issues. We've been doing work with individuals dealing with moral injury, where people are dealing with trauma on a daily basis, also experiencing their own trauma, some of which may be PTSD, some of which may be moral injury, where they've been exposed to doing things or making choices that clash with their values and their beliefs and aren't what they ought to be. And people are dealing with these kinds of struggles on a daily basis. And while they're in the fight, while they're in the ICUs and in the emergency rooms, we've been trying to support them on the front lines. And at the same time, it isn't time to peel back the traumas that they're experiencing. If we did, it would leave them too vulnerable to be able to deal with that. So it's when is the right time? And then also, if people are off work too long after they've come out from the front lines, if they're off work too long, then the possibility of them coming back into the professions that they love may be more compromised. So we want to be able to intervene immediately. So there's the supports that can be given to sustain people on the front lines of the work that they do. Families, while they're in those stressful situations, our care providers, our essential workers, our military members, our public safety personnel, while they're in that pressure cooker. And then to be able to leverage that and build immediately into provision of additional supports to help them be able to keep themselves in check, one another in check, to look out for one another, and to get some immediate responses early in the intervention phase, so that they're not left bleeding, if I can say that, emotionally and otherwise, from the incredible ways that they have so much taken care of our society and served us. So I think it's incumbent upon us to anticipate that those who have served us during these times are going to also need to be supported in these next days. We anticipate that there is going to be fallout from a mental health and moral injury perspective following COVID-19 and these other situations, and we need to be ready, the rest of us, to be able to buoy them from a community perspective and help them get through what they've carried on our behalf, so that they can get back to doing the work that they love to do, and that's caring for us.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Suzette, thank you so much.
All right.
We'll catch up with you in the panel discussion in just about a half hour's time. I'm going to hand it over to Prima.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Suzette, such a voice of reason and wisdom. Next up, we're going to be presenting Dr. Brandon Hauer. Dr. Brandon Hauer is a recent graduate from the Neurosciences PhD program at the University of Alberta, where he was co-supervised by Drs. Clayton Dixon and Sylvia Pigliardini. His research interests are in network neurophysiology, specifically in how electrical activity in various memory-related brain structures is coordinated during deep sleep and sleep-like states, using a variety of cutting-edge optical and pharmacological techniques. He has previously been awarded funding by the University of Alberta's Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, Alberta Innovates, and by the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada at both the master's and doctoral levels. Dr. Hauer's work has received national and international media attention and has been selected for numerous awards, including the Canadian Association for Neuroscience's Brain Star Prize. Currently, he is working as a scientific consultant in the biotechnology sector. Welcome, Dr. Brandon Hauer.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you to Campus Alberta Neuroscience for the invite here. Very excited to talk about one of my favorite things, which is sleep, and especially sleep and memory, and why sleep is so important. And so I'll wait till I can get my slides up here before progressing any further. Perfect. We can head to the next slide here. So a little bit about me before we get going, because you're thinking, who is this guy who's talking to me? I am a recent neuroscience PhD graduate from the U of A, where I worked in the brain rhythms lab. And so I was really interested in brain rhythms. And I'll talk about what that means and what a brain rhythm actually is throughout this presentation. Well, especially the idea that these brain rhythms and sleep might have something to do with memory and how that might actually be happening. And now I'm working in the biotechnology sector. I was going to put a picture of me on the slide, but I imagine you can picture what I look like by now. Next slide, please. So, in a presentation about sleep, it's probably first useful to characterize what sleep actually is. And so, as one prominent sleep scientist, Alan Recht, often said, if sleep doesn't serve an absolutely vital function, it is the biggest mistake evolution ever made. And that makes sense. If you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't make sense for us to spend, a third of every day asleep, completely unprotected. We're not gathering food, we're not gathering water, we're exposed to predators, all sorts of things, right? But yet we sleep, and curiously enough, everything sleeps. Everything that, or every animal that we have studied carefully sleeps or has some analog of sleep. So this cute red panda, or lizards, or birds, or dolphins, or this honeybee, everything has some kind of analog of sleep, even if that looks a little bit different. So for example, this dolphin sleeps one hemisphere of its brain at a time, a little bit different than us. Or, sea lions bask in sunlight, and this is a kind of slow wave sleep for them. But I think broadly speaking, we could characterize sleep in a few different ways. If I asked you, what is sleep? You'd say, oh, I'm laying down and it's dark, and, I'm in my 7th hour of Zoom meetings today. But what we could probably say is that one of the first hallmarks is that you're less responsive to stimuli. So generally speaking, you shouldn't be able to hear what's going on around you. Similarly, a typical posture, right? So that if you said laying down, that's probably correct, unless you're some kind of vampire, I suppose. Similarly, less motor activity. You generally don't want to be moving around while sleeping because you're not aware of what's going on. And then finally, and importantly for this talk, distinct electrical brain activity. And so it's not as though your brain is just shutting off when you go to sleep. It's actually quite the opposite. And so we'll talk a little bit about that electrical brain activity next here. If I can go to the next slide. Perfect. So one way that we could study sleep, or indeed some of this electrical activity going on in the brain, is with a technique called EEG, or electroencephalography. And so if you look in the top left, this happy looking person is wearing this mesh cap with a bunch of circles and little wires extending from it. And so this is an EEG, electroencephalography cap, that basically is recording all sorts of summed electrical activity going on throughout your brain. So you can think of electricity as the currency of information exchange in the brain. And so each of these little electrodes on this cap is recording, through hair, through scalp, through bone, everything else, at this electrical activity going on underneath. And so this person looks pretty awake to me. And so if we were recording brain activity from this person, what we would see is something pretty similar to what we'd see at the top line there. That top squiggly trace that looks like an earthquake is coming is not actually that. That is all the summed electrical activity in your brain. And so what we can see is that there's no obvious rhythm. It's just kind of random jittery motion. And the amplitude is pretty small. By amplitude, I mean from the bottom to the top of the trace. It's just not a very big potential. But now say this person has had their Thanksgiving dinner, they're sitting down in their favorite armchair, ready to watch their favorite football team lose if they're anything like me. What we'd see is something more like the drowsier stage 1 sleep, where you're seeing a little bit more rhythmicity to the signal, a little bit greater amplitude, so it's a little bit larger, but more rhythmicity coming out, right? You have regular kind of rhythms emerging from this brain activity. As this person starts to really fall asleep into stage 2 sleep here, we can see a similar pattern emerge, that basically the amplitude gets larger, the activity gets slower and a little bit more rhythmic. And there are other things mentioned here, sleep spindles and K complexes. But what's important is this kind of growing synchrony as you get deeper into sleep. That's most obvious in stage 3 sleep, which I have highlighted in the green box here as slow wave sleep. It's called slow wave sleep pretty obviously because it looks like slow waves. Basically, you have these very nice, roughly 1 hertz rhythms going on across much of the brain at the same time. You have this awesome synchrony of up and down throughout or very much of the brain. And so this is your slow wave sleep, which is what I'll be talking about a lot throughout this talk. And finally, at the bottom, we have REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. And this is your dreaming sleep. If you're having a dream, chances are it's usually during REM sleep. So named because your brain looks like you're awake and you're living out these very active dreams and imaginings, but you don't want to actually be able to act them out. And so your body is completely, or your muscles are completely paralyzed temporarily while you're in REM, except for your eyes. Your eyes move very quickly. And so that's where the name rapid eye movement sleep comes from. All other kinds of sleep could be called non-rapid eye movement sleep. So really what I want you to get out of this, there will not be a test, is that sleep is active, right? None of these are just flat lines that your brain is just turned off, no problem, good night, see you later. There's different states, which I would say imply different things are going on in each of them. The general pattern that we see is that these EEG patterns, these brainwave patterns, are slowing down and becoming more synchronized as you get deeper into sleep. Next slide, please. So a different way that we could look at this is with this hypnogram. That's your word of the day today. So this whole thing is referred to as a hypnogram. On the x-axis, we have hours. This person is getting a seemingly implausible perfect 8 hours of sleep. And on the y-axis, we have different stages. So stage W is wake. Stage R is REM. That's your dreaming sleep. And then stage N1, N2, N3 are your non-rapid eye movement sleeps, with circled in green here, N3 being slow wave sleep. And so what you can see is a kind of general pattern that, this person falls asleep pretty quickly, again, very impressive, and then has a lot of slow wave sleep early in the night. The first 4 hours or so there's lots of slow wave sleep going on. And the opposite pattern emerges later in the night. What you're seeing is more of this REM sleep, more of this dreaming sleep coming on later in the night. And now, importantly, it's a neat kind of caveat that, say this person goes to bed at 11 o'clock every night and wakes up at 7. They get their regular 8 hours. All of a sudden, some night, they go to bed at 3 in the morning. It's not as though this just gets compressed and they pack everything into a smaller window. They just lose that slow wave sleep from the beginning of their sleep episode. And so it's really important to try to keep a consistent sleep schedule, which we'll be talking about later on in the talk. Next slide, please. So long ago, some pretty clever people thought, sleep and memory, I wonder if there's something there. And so they proposed a pretty simple experiment saying, how does sleep deprivation affect memory, if at all? And so it's actually a pretty easy sleep or experiment to do. What you do is, if we kind of block this out in the diagrams on the right side of your screen, we have during the day, there's, people are going about the day, no problem. And then in the evening, sometime they're trained on a list of word pairs, So say I say avocado, you say airplane, right? They remember a whole list of words like this, and then they go to bed. No problem. They sleep for the full night and wake up in the morning and are tested. And so the test would be, I said avocado, what was the answer there? And hopefully the person would say airplane if they remembered correctly. And so a bunch of word pairs like that. And you compare that group of people against another group who goes through the same training, same day as per usual, but instead of sleeping at night, they just sit in a nice armchair, but are kept awake, right? It's, they have time to just sit there and they're relaxed, but they're not sleeping. And then are tested in the morning just the same way. And so you might think, well, those people sitting in the chair can really ponder what they've learned, right? Avocado, airplane, right? I don't know why these are the two I'm picking today, but hey, I guess it is, right? Really fixating on these word pairs, really trying to remember them. But next slide, please. In fact, that's not the case. It turns out that sleep deprivation actually decreases the memory. So people who got a good night's sleep remembered better. And so you're maybe thinking now, well, I guess, yeah, that makes a little bit more sense, because after all, this is a pretty tricky study to do. If you were kept awake all night, like these people were, you'd probably be less alert. You'd probably be fatigued. You'd be stressed. There'd be all sorts of other things going on besides the memory. And so a follow-up to this would be to say, well, let's not remove sleep, but instead just add a little bit more. Next slide, please. And so that's exactly what this group did. So they had people go about their regular morning, and then at the end of the morning, they were trained on another list of word pairs like this, and then they had a nap, right? So it's not like they lost anything. They just had a nice 90-minute nap, and then woke up and were tested afterwards. and compared to, again, a group that went about their morning as per usual and then was trained on the same list of word pairs, but just then relaxed quietly, got to ponder life's mysteries, and then were tested afterwards. And if we can go to the next slide, please. What you'll see is that the nap group actually performed better. And so this time it's not as though these people were sleep deprived, it's midday. And so presumably they're pretty awake, they're pretty engaged, they have time to rehearse. But there seems to be something special about sleep, that sleep is helping to consolidate these types of memories as people are sleeping, seemingly completely offline, not able to rehearse. So something special is going on in sleep, but what is it, right? So is there something special about these different states? I talked about rapid eye movement sleep versus non-rapid eye movement sleep. So maybe there's something going on there. If you go to the next slide, please. So some very clever people came up with this idea to have people go about their regular day, and just before they go to bed, they're trained on the same kind of task. And then 4 hours later, they're woken up very rudely in the middle of the night, which I wouldn't be terribly happy about. But for the sake of this experiment, what they were trying to do is test them after they got a bunch of this very dense slow wave sleep, most of the slow wave sleep early on, and then test them after that. And they compared this group of people against people who were instead woken up in the middle of the night to be trained, and then went back to sleep and got basically the last half of their sleep, and were tested subsequently. And wouldn't you know it, the people who got more slow wave sleep performed significantly better than the REM sleep group. And so it suggests that there's something very special about slow wave sleep going on for memory function in particular. Next slide, please. And so, why slow wave sleep? Why in the world is this happening, right? It certainly seems to be coming up over and over again that slow wave sleep has this protective benefit. But, what is it? And so I think a little bit, to step back from this a little bit, what we'll do is look at this cartoon of a human brain here. So we have the front of the brain on the left. It's basically, if you cut it right down the middle, we're looking at that. So the bottom at the bottom, front at the left. And you have various structures labeled here. So the hippocampus and cerebral cortex are highlighted, and the thalamus as well, but I'll get to that at the end. So the hippocampus, if you search memory area of brain, the hippocampus will assuredly come up. It is one of the most prominent memory centers that if you're experiencing something, you're learning something, you're walking around a new city, your hippocampus is very online, it's very activated, it's rapidly processing information. But somehow over time, that kind of that memory you formed gets spread throughout much more of the brain, throughout the cerebral cortex. And so the cerebral cortex being the noodly bit around you that makes you smart. And so how is this happening, right? How do you actually have this exchange of information from hippocampus to cerebral cortex? And it turns out that during slow wave sleep, you have this excellent platform for synchrony. So by synchrony, I mean the hippocampus and the cerebral cortex are doing the same thing at the same time. Basically, they're speaking the same language. They're able to communicate very effectively. And it seems like during slow wave sleep is this ideal platform to send information from the hippocampus out to the cortex for long-term storage. So you can remember things for hours or days or even for the rest of your life. You have this distributed storage that happens because of slow wave sleep and this synchronous activity happening throughout. I have the thalamus listed here because I spent my PhD studying a role of the thalamus, and in particular a part called the nucleus reunions, in facilitating the dialogue between these two, basically as an intermediary that says, what did you say? Okay, here's what he said, and moves it on that way. Next slide, please. So, I've been talking about memory a lot because obviously I'm pretty keenly interested in memory, but is slow wave sleep good for anything else, right? All, yammer all about memory. And so hopefully you believe me by now that it's important for learning and memory. But another kind of theory that's related to that is this so-called synaptic homeostasis hypothesis. So this is the idea that as you're awake, your brain is constantly working. It's forming connections, it's learning things, it's just constantly saturated with information. And then sleep is the price you pay for having such an active, smart brain, that basically you have synaptic downscaling and you have this time to just let everything cool down a little bit, right? Pour some coolant on the engine as it was, and just let everything kind of equilibrate, get back to normal so you can wake up and form new memories and connections all over again. Beyond that, you have increases in cardiovascular and cognitive function. So this study was looking at even just taking a few short naps several times a week, improved heart and brain health pretty quickly. Improvements in metabolism, improvements in alertness. I think there's a lot of studies now looking at how dangerous it is to operate motor vehicles if you're very sleep deprived. And so, having that extra alertness is good. Increased behavioral performance. You'd be good at all sorts of things, like these people looking at the backs of alarm clocks at 6 in the morning, right? An excellent skill to have. Next slide, please. One other cool thing that I really like about sleep and that is increasingly being appreciated in the last few years is something called the glymphatic system. So many of you have likely heard of the lymphatic system. You have lymph nodes all over your body that are helping to process waste, things that you don't need anymore, get rid of them, right? Well, it turns out the brain has a very similar kind of waste disposal system. So during the day, especially, you have these soluble proteins, metabolites, old boots, anchors, all sorts of gunk build up that needs to be cleared out. And so this is what your lymphatic system is doing, is it's purging all of this detritus from your brain, basically. And so on top of that, it's also having a role in distributing non-waste compounds. So your brain needs sugar, it needs glucose, lipids, amino acids, neurotransmitters all throughout the brain. And the lymphatic system is this ideal highway to kind of get rid of all the waste and then spread all the good stuff back out. And wouldn't you know it, it functions mainly during sleep, and especially slow wave sleep. So again, you have the brain doing all sorts of things during the day, and sleep is this profound time for clearing out potentially neurotoxic waste products. And so I've included this point that one of the waste products that's cleared by the lymphatic system is beta amyloid, which is a main component of the plaques that are formed in the brain in Alzheimer's disease, which a lot of people are very keenly interested in. So you could kind of think of the brain as kind of a recycle bin, right? That basically you wonder, oh, how come I can't bank up sleep, right? I got a big weekend coming up, or I have a bunch of finals coming up. How come I can't just sleep for 20 hours a day and then be good to go? Well, you can't empty your recycle bin more than empty, right? You have to keep draining that every day, right? There's a bunch of crap in there, but you can't get it out completely. You can't go more than empty. And so you need to keep regularly doing this. You need to keep regularly sleeping to keep that optimal function going. Next slide, please. Now, of course, there has to be the bad news that if you're not sleeping, if you're getting or experiencing sleep loss, there are presumably and expectedly detriments to that. Like you'd be in this very blue room looking very sadly at the back of an alarm clock that says 4 a.m. all the time. So you don't want that. So of course, you'd have difficulty forming new memories. Hopefully you believe that by now. Increased stress, increased risk for obesity and diabetes, hunger and appetite, increased pain, and in fact, lower threshold for pain. Things that wouldn't normally hurt suddenly would hurt a lot more. Increased risk taking. Maybe you wake up and say, I don't really need to go to that meeting. And that could actually be related to the decrease in optimism and sociability. I mean, I think a lot of us have had a night where we haven't slept well, wake up for an early meeting and say, man, this is just the worst. I really don't feel like doing this. A lot of that might be attributed to sleep loss. It might also be attributed to maybe your meeting isn't fun. Who knows? But other risks are cardiovascular complications, increased rate of mood and psychiatric disorders, basically across the board. All sorts of different types, including Alzheimer's, have relations to sleep that, sleep can be preventative or is seen to decline as these diseases progress. Next slide, please. But fear not, right? There are ways to improve your sleep, and some of these are ways that Suzette talked about previously, and some are kind of, everyone talks about them, and it's frustrating. Oh, but I avoided screens and whatnot. But there's lots of techniques that you can use to start right now, tonight. Not right now. It's really bad to sleep right now for the next 20 or so minutes. Turns out studies have shown. One of the things you can do is get a consistent sleep schedule. So, a lot of people say, yeah, go to bed at the same time every night, not too late, regular time. That's good and all, but really what I want to emphasize is this starts from the minute you wake up, right? Your circadian rhythm is really good at telling day and night and wants you to sleep when it's dark and get up when it's light. And so, of course, having your room be dark at night and avoiding screens and everything like this is good. But as soon as you wake up in the morning, ideally you want to get some of that sunrise color in your eye, get some sunshine on you, ideally without even a window in between, right? And a consistent wake up time. Have this, every day I get up, I have this signal to my brain that, hey, it's time to wake up. And even if you're not aware of it, you'll just start waking up more naturally at that time. And so your circadian rhythm isn't something that you do just before sleep. It's all the time, right? Get blue light first thing in the morning as much as you can. Similarly, reserving your bedroom for sleeping, right? You don't want to be watching screens or scrolling Netflix or Instagram or anything like this. Keep your bedroom just for sleeping. Build that association in your brain, that healthy hygiene, that my bedroom is a place for sleep and rest, and that's all. Another study looked at how regular exercise could actually reduce time to fall asleep in people. So, brisk walking in this case, 4 times a week, that's all it is, just walking 4 times a week, improved in these people's sleep quality, time to fall asleep, how long they stay to sleep, all sorts of benefits that happened pretty quickly after starting to exercise. And it doesn't take, running for a full hour every day or doing heavy deadlifts, just any kind of activity to get you out and moving and especially experiencing that sun if you can in the morning, be really good. For my own work, we know that oxygen promotes deep restorative sleep. And so what we were looking at is just increasing the percentage of oxygen by, a few percentage actually immediately increased the amount of slow wave sleep people were getting. And similarly, if we actually lowered the amount of oxygen and just replaced it with nitrogen, like you get on a plane, right? Roughly 15% oxygen instead of 21, is what we'd see is the opposite effect. You're suddenly getting a lot less slow wave sleep and more of this kind of activated state that immediately came back as soon as we got oxygen back to normal. And so this other study I've referenced here looked at the effect of just opening a window in your bedroom to try and reduce some of that carbon dioxide and increase that oxygen coming in, being really good for helping you fall and stay asleep. I mean, it's obviously not viable all the time here. In Edmonton today, it's pretty nice, so I think I will be doing this. Blue light filters, I've always been curious about, do they work? What's going on there? Turns out they do. But only at night, right? Again, you really need blue light, especially in the morning and throughout the day. But at night, reducing the amount of blue light you're getting can actually help you reduce the time. It can actually help reduce your time to fall asleep. And looking into this, it seemed to be because blue light can actually reduce slow wave activity, especially in your frontal cortex. And so trying to take measures to, I mean, there's blue light filters on your phone and other devices, or blue light blocking glasses are good. Ideally, you would just avoid blue light altogether, right? Have the lights dim in your house, try to avoid screens for an hour before bed, things like this. Next slide, please. In more of the kind of sci-fi angle is new technologies that are coming out trying to help facilitate your sleep in an exogenous way. So I should note, I am in no way associated with Philips or any product. I just think this is pretty neat that basically this Philips Smart Sleep advertises itself as put your deep sleep to work, which obviously caught my and my lab's attention. And so what it is basically this funny looking little cap that has two small sensors and a headband that are basically recording your brain activity. And they can detect when you're in slow wave sleep. So you can see the phone, the companion app on the right side is looking at when they're going into slow wave sleep at the very bottom there. And when you do, it detects that and plays very quiet tones through little earpieces. So your partner wouldn't hear them. But you play this kind of regular 1 hertz tone that actually seems to be very good at facilitating and entraining these slow waves, right? You can see this trace at the bottom. They have their blue ticks every second that they're playing. And you're seeing this immediate increase in slow waves. And so it seems like this actually works. What's not clear is if this actually translates to improved memory or improved sleep quality, anything like this. So we're kind of just at the forefront of this technology that we know we can do this. We're just not sure what it does and what it does long term. Next slide, please. So my take-home message is not that you should be terrified of you didn't sleep well last night. I didn't either. What I want to get you across is that sleep is a profoundly active time for your brain. It's not just serving some single function that, oh, I'm sleepy, so it's time to rest, but it's doing things for your physiology, neurobiology, psychology. It's doing things across the board that are so important for you. And so sleep, and especially slow wave sleep, are good for all of these things, right? You want better memory, health, behavior, all sorts of things. Try to prioritize your sleep, right? And that's not to say that if you're laying awake at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, that you should be panicking, but it's just to help you understand that, oh, this is what will happen when I eventually do sleep, because you eventually will fall asleep. So, rest easy. I'm certainly happy to answer questions now, or feel free to email me at the address here, or reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn, where I'm always sharing sleep-related things. And I'll leave you with a quote that the best cure for insomnia is to get a lot of sleep. And so thank you so much, and thank you again to Campus Alberta Neuroscience for having me.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was really enlightening. We have a question from the audience here about how people that have naturally more biphasic sleep patterns compare to people who have a more monophasic sleep pattern.
Yeah, interesting question. And so if I understand the question, meaning basically rather than, get a full 8 hours at night, how that would compare. And I think, it probably works for some people, but it's really tough to trick your circadian rhythm, basically, right? So, I mean, shift workers can get pretty used to sleeping during the day and being awake at night, but it's never permanent. It's never a 100% perfect fix, basically, that you're always missing something. Your slow wave sleep will never be quite as good without that regular circadian rhythm that we have evolved and are built to have, right? At night, there's certain parts of your brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus being one of them, that fires a certain way and says, no, it's time for sleep right now. And that will always be the case. And so you can really, some people will get pretty used to, I like, naps or a biphasic schedule, but I would say that at the end of the day, it's not going to be as effective as just getting a regular sleep at night and then waking up with the sunrise. I mean, ideally going to bed at sunset and waking up at sunrise, but that's not always viable depending on your time zone.
Interesting. And now as consumers too, we're inundated with a variety of wearables out there on the market that say that they measure our recovery and monitor our sleep. Do you have any words of wisdom and advice on those?
Yeah, I mean, your mileage may vary. So, I mean, I really enjoy sleep and I really like data because I did a PhD, so I must, right? But I don't wear any sleep wearable or anything like it because I quite frankly don't want the data. I'm not really interested in knowing what my sleep score is or anything like that, because I don't want to be stressed out if all of a sudden, I was kept up late and, I fell asleep at 1 a.m. or something. I don't want my app telling me the next morning, boy, did you sleep poorly? And, was very upset with me all of a sudden, right? And so I think I would say if you're really interested in this, the ones that I would say I would support the most are ones that aren't trying to necessarily sell you anything, ones that are just more for recording data, saying here's how you slept, rather than try to improve your sleep score this way, or you have to do X, Y, and Z to have the super quality workouts or something like this. I think the ones that are just more for recording are the ones that are more believable, because certainly we have the technology now and, wristwatches and other things like this to record really good data from, heart rate and movement and sleep and all sorts of things like this. It just depends what you want to do with the data. And so if you're purely curious about it for yourself, absolutely, we have good tech out there, but it's just what you want to do with it is what I'd be cautious of.
Excellent. Interesting. Thank you so much. We're going to transition now into our panel discussion. So I'd like to invite Jordan, Suzette, and Bonnie back to the stage, please, and we can get started. Oh, Jordan, are we having a little bit of trouble hearing you? Oh, he's going to try to pop back on. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Have you got me? There we go. Thank you so much, Brandon. Thanks to all of you. And yeah, let's dive into the panel discussion. So on Mondays and Tuesdays, nutrition in our household here in the Witzel family is pretty good. I try and meditate and stay curious and get out into nature, but I often fail at both nutrition and meditation and immersion in nature by the end of the week. Brandon, I've had a sleep study ring. I've had a watch. While you were talking, I opened my window to circulate some of the oxygen. None of these things stick in my life, and I know so many of us struggle at this. How do we build a habit in these right ways to really make these things stick in our lives? I'll start with Bonnie. We'll move to Suzette and then through Brandon.
My audio keeps going off. Can you hear it now?
We can hear you right now, yeah.
Okay, great. I don't know why the microphone kept turning red. How can I help you, Jordan? I'd like to bring up something that might help you and the audience, and I wish I had put it in my slides, but I didn't know that Suzette was going to talk about Fort McMurray. So I'll just tell you a little bit of data, because I have no slides at this point, but there are probably 10 placebo-controlled randomized trials in the world that have shown improved resilience in non-clinical samples. In other words, not people with diagnosed mental disorders, but just general population, improved mental resilience when they take a B complex. And so in our flood study, one of the arms of our treatment was there's something going on here, sorry, with my Wi-Fi. One of the arms of the treatment study was B complex. And indeed, people got just as well as people who took a broad spectrum micronutrient. They absolutely paralleled. They got their depression, anxiety, and stress plummeted in 4 to 6 weeks. It improved their coping, it improved their resilience. Pop one a day after breakfast, always on a full stomach, and it improves resilience in a time of crisis. So then along came the Fort McMurray fires after the flood. So I thought, well, now we've got all this earthquake data from New Zealand and all the flood study data from Alberta. Let's go to, and I went to the mayor's office, who sent me to emergency medical, who sent me to psychiatry, who sent me to dietitians. All I wanted was to educate the people who were leaving their homes and didn't have a kitchen to continue cooking healthy food, to at least try to improve their resilience by going to a store, getting an over-the-counter B complex, because I know this data. And we weren't allowed to do that. We weren't allowed to tell them. We weren't allowed to put it in a pamphlet. I was told that this is, it's just not done. We don't tell people to take pills. Now, that is just a bias. One of you was saying something about thinking outside the box, I think, Suzette. Yes, we need to get people to learn about nutrients and mental health, to think outside the box. And it's such a very easy thing for people to do, as long as we don't have inappropriate expectations. It's not going to cure an anxiety disorder, or I don't use the word cure usually. It's not going to control an anxiety disorder, but it does improve resilience. And by the way, Brandon, we have to talk about the research on sleep and nutrition, but we'll do that another time. So Jordan, is that going to help your household?
I know how to start my day now with one extra thing.
Just don't be startled if your urine turns day glow yellow, okay? We do get people say, oh, what's it doing to me? My hair is bright yellow. It's just the spilling out of riboflavin that you're doing. Don't panic.
Okay. Well, turn the same question to Suzette. How do we implement some of the tools that you've been talking about?
I'm going to suggest that it's about choices and making small incremental changes in a successful way that can stick. I think there's the opportunity to take something that's going to supplement and support, but then there's my choice and your choice. And so one of the things that that has been demonstrated is that if we repeat something over a period of 3 weeks, 21 days or more, that a behavior starts to change, that we start to develop a habit, a new pattern. So we have to choose things that are going to be successful first, so that we have a sense that are meaningful to us, that really will facilitate change. So choosing something that is doable, and making small successful goals that we're going to be able to achieve, and then being able to stick to it. But it really is about doing something that's going to fit within, Jordan, your life and your family unit and your world, that's going to be successful and doable and sustainable. So it's those changes. There's the behaviors. You and I we can take a pill to help us, but no pill is going to make it so that I stick to my exercise routine. It's going to have to be something that enables me to see the value in it, see something that's meaningful, have those successes, and then build a habit that's going to be able to be sustainable. Sometimes doing something with other people and doing something that's going to facilitate connection and meaning and endorphins, not just from doing, for example, exercise, but from the connections that we have, the oxytocin that gets spilled out when we're connecting and doing things that enable us to be with one another. So having things that we're holding each other accountable to, we're creating a new way of engaging. It's about a way of life, not just about what we're doing in terms of what we do, but how long we do it and how we choose to do it. I think it goes back to success. It goes back to do things that are going to be successful, that are meaningful in an incremental way, that's going to be sustained. So I have every confidence in you, Jordan, that you're going to be able to make some sustainable changes going forward if you pace yourself well and follow on Dr. Kaplan's suggestion about doing all of those other things that are going to support like sleep and eating, so that then you're set up well to be able to make those behavioral changes that actually say, in this moment, will I choose this or this? Because in every moment, we only have a choice about what we put into our body, what we put into our mind, and what we choose to do with our volition and our action. So every moment is a choice. So every moment, every day is one of, do I build a habit? Do I continue to look for the successes and build up on my successes or not, in small incremental ways? There. I hope that helps. I have every confidence. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brandon.
And so I think, I mean, like, these are all, really good pieces of advice. I think, sleep is a more privileged one because you have a little bit more physical control over what you're doing. And so, for example, I mean, you can choose to plug your phone in a different place, right? If you're checking your phone at night or before bed, plug your phone in a different room, right? If you, like, I rely on my phone for an alarm, but plug it in on the other side of the room or in a different room so you don't have that temptation. I don't have a clock in my bedroom because I don't want to know what time it is when it's 3 a.m. and I can't sleep, right? I don't need that. I don't need any other screens. And so, I mean, you could remove the TV from your room, right? Trying to reduce screens. And so doing that, I think, helps, in the early going, but at the same time, you have to, commit to actually plugging your phone in somewhere else or anything like this, identifying whatever, maladaptive habits you might have. But the other thing is, I think, just trying to stick with it. And even without knowing, I think your body will start to respond in really favorable ways. Right. And so if you start going to bed at the same time and getting up at the same time every day, even if you try to sleep in the weekend, you'll probably start getting up a little bit earlier. It'll be a little bit easier for you to wake up. And I mean, there was a study a few years ago that looked at the effect of in teenagers, basically just switching the light in their bedroom on while they were totally asleep, unaware of it for, I think it was 30 seconds or a minute or something, and then turning it back off. Help those kids wake up very easy without knowing that they had been exposed to light. But it was just that early morning light cue is such a powerful thing to help you start that day and signal to your body just naturally, oh, it's time to wake up. And so I think even without you consciously doing it, if you do it for a few days, you'll start to notice, hey, it's a little bit easier to wake up right now, and at bedtime, hey, I'm a little bit sleepier. And so I think, trying to stick with it a little bit, it'll happen kind of before you even realize it, if you're able to stick with it for any length of time.
Give space to Preetma if you have any questions. If not, I can hop in with another one.
Yeah, I'll hop in with some questions here. There was one interesting question for Bonnie with, I'm trying to find it, the order of these keep getting a little bit.
Oh, was it about dementia, Preetma?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was sorry we didn't get to that. I saw it on the screen. Frankly, it's another example, as with mental health, that somehow people don't want to hear about the importance of nutrition for the brain. I don't understand why, but right now, the strongest evidence for prevention of dementia and for slowing cognitive decline is dietary, and they come from dietary interventions like the MIND trials from Claire Morris in the late Claire Morris from University of Illinois, to the VitaCog trial from Oxford University at the UK that was not a dietary intervention, it was a high B complex. And the VitaCog trial, I mean, just as one example, because I was talking about B complex just now, I don't think this is the be all and end all, because I think our brains need more than just B vitamins, but they did a high dose B complex study in people who had already been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, so first stage in dementia, and they were randomized to get either high dose B complex or placebo, and they came back 2 years later, tested them for cognitive function, broke the blind, and guess who did better? Obviously not placebo. And they did fMRIs, and they showed that the people who had been on B complex had significantly less brain atrophy than the people who had gotten placebo. There's not a huge amount of data out there, but there are a number of clinical trials. The media has no interest. I don't think that the people who are in conventional medicine have an interest, because they're all looking for a drug that is going to fix dementia. It's a bias of our society, to look for a drug. So I don't remember if I don't remember the question exactly, if I addressed it specifically, but I know that was the topic.
Yes, I believe you did address it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Brendan, there's a question here for you in terms of, should people avoid getting blue light filter coatings on their prescription lenses if they should be getting that blue light during the daytime?
Yeah, get blue light during the daytime. Absolutely. I think, yes, having a blue light, blocking coating is good at night if you're only wearing those in the evening when you don't want to be getting, light after the sunset. But during the day, and especially first thing in the morning, that blue light is so important as a cue to wake up and start all of the the neurobiological cascades that signal, oh, it's time to wake up now, and help keep you awake during the day as well. I mean, you can imagine if all of a sudden in the afternoon you wore a sleep mask or something, or limited the amount of light you were getting, you'd probably start to get sleepy. And so it's an important thing that you're getting this natural blue light, because it's what we've evolved to do, and something that, yeah, I think you should try to be getting it.
We want to give the last thought to Suzette. Suzette did have some thoughts on dementia and resilience. Suzette was having a little bit of trouble hearing Preetma, as Preetma asked Bonnie a question. But Suzette, I'll let you speak on your thoughts on dementia and resilience.
Thank you. I think I just want to say that resilience in mental health and well-being is something to consider across the lifespan. So starting to build resilience at a very young age and supporting resilience and well-being throughout the lifespan into the senior years is really, really critical. And I don't think I could say enough about the importance of taking time to connect and attach. If I think about our young ones, one of the most protective factors in resilience is being able to attach and connect and validate them, and have at least one solid connect point of connection in their world, someone who they can trust. Likewise, I would say that after working in the field as a clinician with our elder population in geriatric mental health and geriatric psychiatry, those who are struggling with dementia, again, where the human need for connection and attachment is so much there. And so the time to be with people as they are journeying through that, their caregivers who are supporting them in and through that, seeing and hearing and valuing, validating people for who they are and what their lived experience is, and extending respect and looking at, again, from a strengths-based perspective, what can we do to cultivate and build on people's potential and strengths and help them retain those abilities, and to have an ability in a strengths-based lens from the point of someone's youth through their older age, that every one of us can build on that to be able to value and have meaning, purpose, and quality of life. So not to be forgotten, I think one of the greatest poverties in our time right now is isolation, which has been exacerbated by COVID-19, as well as those who are dealing with chronic conditions such as dementia that will have life-altering impacts or potential life-altering impacts. So really finding time and ways for people to be seen and have meaning and purpose, connection. Yeah. Thank you.
We'll say thanks to all three of you for your contributions, for your presentations, and all of the thoughts that you shared. And we'll let people break for about 20 minutes before we get into session 3. But again, Bonnie, Suzette, Brandon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
And thank you, and Pritna, for your moderation. And Brandon, Bonnie, wonderful to be with you for these few minutes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.